A quiet park in Harlem, 1943. Bicycles whisper past on narrow paths. Leaves stir in the wind. Somewhere in the distance a church bell rings, stubbornly normal in a country that is anything but. A woman sits alone on a bench, handbag folded neatly in her lap. She is waiting. Soon she will meet a German officer. Soon she will hand over a piece of paper. On it are names, addresses, families, a death list. Footsteps approach. A young girl appears, maybe 12 at first glance. Braided pigtails, soft face, the picture of innocence. She could be on her way home from school. The girl stops in front of the bench. "Excuse me," she asks politely, almost shy. "What is your name?" the woman answers. The girl nods once. No hesitation, no speech, no warning. From beneath her coat, a pistol rises in a steady hand. Their eyes meet. A single shot cracks through the park. Birds explode from the trees. The woman collapses sideways onto the wood, the list slipping from her fingers. The girl lowers the weapon. For the briefest moment she simply looks at what she has done. Then she turns, walks to her bicycle, climbs on and rides away. Her name is Freddie Oversteegen. She is 16 years old, and with one bullet she has just saved hundreds of lives, because that paper the woman carried would have sent entire families to the trains, to the camps, to a future from which no one returned. Freddie will never know exactly who she saved. She will only know who she killed. By the time the war ends, Freddie and her older sister will execute Nazis and collaborators again and again, in bars, on doorsteps, in the silence of the woods. How many? No one can say. Whenever people ask, Freddie gives them the same reply. You should never ask a soldier that question. This is the story of schoolgirls who became assassins, of teenagers who used lipstick and laughter as weapons, of sisters who learned to fire guns in the dark beneath the earth, of young women who took lives, yet fought with everything they had to keep their own humanity alive. Before the pistols, before the forests, before the blood, there was a childhood, and a mother who taught them a single rule. When you see injustice, you act. Long before Freddie Oversteegen carried a pistol in her bicycle basket, she carried something else. An education, not from school books, but from life at the very bottom of society, where survival and solidarity were often the same thing. Freddie was born in 1925 in a small village just outside Harlem. Money was scarce, stability even scarcer. For a time the family lived on a houseboat that creaked with every change of weather, as if the world itself were uncertain whether it wanted them there. Her father struggled to provide. Her mother, Trine, fierce, political, unafraid, believed in action over comfort. If someone was being crushed by injustice, you did not turn your head. You stepped in. When Freddie was still young, her parents separated. She remembered her father standing at the bow as they left, singing a French farewell, a last image drifting away across the water. After that, he was mostly gone. Trine moved Freddie and her older sister Tros into a cramped apartment in Harlem. The girls slept on straw-filled mattresses. Winters were cold. Meals were simple. Yet the door was always open. Refugees from Germany, Jews fleeing persecution, political dissidents, people whose names the girls sometimes never learned. Strangers would appear at night and vanish by morning. Freddie and Truces grew up giving away space they did not have, sharing beds, blankets, food. They made toys for children trapped in the Spanish Civil War. They listened to whispered conversations about fascism, betrayal, and courage. Comfort, their mother told them, was a luxury. Helping others was a duty. If you must save someone, you must be ready to sacrifice yourself. It was a lesson that settled deep inside them, waiting for the day it would be needed. That day arrived on May 10th, 1940. German forces crossed the Dutch border with terrifying speed. Airplanes roared overhead. Paratroopers fell from the sky. Within 5 days the Netherlands surrendered. Freddie was 14. Truce was 16. Occupation began at once. Swastika flags bloomed from buildings. Boots struck the pavement in perfect rhythm. Orders replaced freedoms and fear moved into every street. Freddie would remember the sound most of all. Rifles smashing against doors in the middle of the night. Wood splintering, men shouting. You could hear it from blocks away, she said later. And you knew that somewhere a family's world was ending. Many people chose silence, survival, keeping their heads down. The Oversteegen family chose something else. They resisted. Trine joined underground networks almost immediately, and her daughters followed. The girls began small, if anything in wartime can be called small. They carried illegal newspapers, they slipped anti-Nazi leaflets into mailboxes. At night they crept through the city with brushes and paste, covering German propaganda with their own warnings. The Netherlands must be free, do not work in Germany. For every Dutch worker, a German soldier is freed for the front. Then they would jump back on their bicycles and race into the darkness, hearts hammering, knowing that if they were caught, childhood would end in front of a firing squad. But who would suspect them? Two girls, braids, bicycles, nervous laughter, invisible. Their courage began to attract attention. In 1941, a knock came at the apartment door. On the other side stood a man named Frans van der Wiel, a commander within the Haarlem resistance. He had heard the stories, the mother hiding fugitives, the daughters spreading forbidden words across the city. He had come with a question: could the girls do more? Freddie was 14, Trows was 16. Their mother did not hesitate. Yes, she said, and the girls said yes too. They did not yet understand what that answer would cost, but very soon they would. Saying yes to the resistance was easy. Understanding what it meant was something else entirely. Frans van der Wiel had seen enthusiasm before. Brave words, bright eyes, and later panic, betrayal, collapse under pressure. The underground could not afford weakness. One frightened person could destroy dozens. So before the sisters received a weapon, they would face a trial. A few days after their agreement, there was another knock at the apartment. This time the door did not open to a friendly face. It burst inward. A man stormed into the room wearing the black leather coat of the Gestapo, a pistol in his hand. German pouring from his mouth like gunfire. He demanded to know where a Jewish man was hiding. It felt real. Too real. Freddie and Truus had seen neighbors dragged away for less. They knew what the secret police did to those who lied. Torture. Deportation. Disappearance. Give us a name, the man shouted. Tell us where he is. The sisters looked at each other, and then they attacked. They kicked, punched, screamed, throwing themselves at the armed intruder with the reckless fury of children who had already decided that betrayal was worse than death. They did not offer a single address, not one. Finally, the man stepped back. The shouting stopped, the pistol lowered, and the Gestapo officer began to smile. It was Frans van der Wiel. The entire raid had been theatre, a test. The girls had passed. Only then did he explain what service in the resistance truly involved. There would be courier work, yes. Sabotage, dangerous missions. Arrest was always possible. Then he paused. There would also be killing. Silence settled over the room. Trows glanced at her younger sister, searching for fear. Freddie broke into a grin. Well, she said, that's something I've never done before. The decision was made. Soon after, the sisters were taken to a hidden training site, an underground potato storage shed, damp and airless, buried beneath the ordinary life of the city. Above them, people walked and talked and shopped. Below, teenagers learned how to end lives. They practiced holding a pistol steady. They learned where to aim, how to breathe, how to fire without thinking, how to remain calm while another human being stopped moving. There was no glory in it, no speeches, only repetition, shadow, and the smell of earth. Before they were trusted with assassinations, they were given something simpler. Fire. Nazi supply depots needed to burn, but they were guarded by SS men. Armed, alert, suspicious. The plan relied on something the enemy consistently underestimated. Two girls. Freddie and Truus approached the guards with smiles. Casual conversation, a bit of flirting, laughter floating easily in the night air. The soldiers relaxed. Why wouldn't they? Behind them, resistance fighters slipped toward the warehouses. Minutes later, flames clawed at the sky. By the time the Germans understood what was happening, the sisters were already pedaling away, hair in the wind, faces innocent. Van der Wiel watched carefully. He understood now. These young women could move through the occupation like ghosts. Doors would open for them, guards would talk to them, targets would trust them. Their youth was camouflage, their femininity a disguise, weapons more powerful than bullets. It was time to use them for what they were truly meant to do. Soon Freddie would be handed an assignment. Not sabotage, not distraction. A name, an address, a person who had to die, and she would carry it out alone. The order came without ceremony. A collaborator, Dutch, dangerous. She had gathered information the Germans desperately wanted, names, streets, entire Jewish families mapped like targets. Once delivered, arrests would begin within hours. After that came the trains. The resistance could not intercept the list, so they would remove the person carrying it. The mission was given to Freddie, 16 years old. She rode through Harlem with the weapon hidden on her bicycle, the metal heavier than anything she had ever carried, not because of its weight, but because of what it would ask her to become. She found the woman exactly where intelligence had predicted, sitting in a public park, calm, unaware, certain that the world still made sense. Freddie slowed her breathing. Walk normally, look harmless. Be the child they expect. She stepped forward and asked the simplest question. What is your name? The woman answered. Confirmation. Time fractured into seconds that seemed to stretch forever. Freddie drew the pistol, felt the shock of it in her own hand, met the woman's eyes and fired. When it was over, instinct took control. Freddie wanted to kneel beside her, to help, to undo what could not be undone. The urge to comfort the dying did not disappear just because you were the one who pulled the trigger. That feeling, she would say later, never left her. She mounted her bicycle and rode away, past houses and canals, past people who had heard the shot but would pretend they hadn't. Behind her the list remained undelivered. Hundreds lived. A line had been crossed, and there was no returning. After that day the sisters were no longer trainees. They were executioners. They began to refine their craft with the cold practicality of people who knew mistakes meant death. Sometimes they worked separately, sometimes as a pair. They studied habits, streets, escape routes. They learned how to disappear. The forest became one of their preferred stages. German officers gathered in taverns, drinking, boasting, believing themselves masters of a conquered land. A young Dutch girl would sit nearby, smiling, listening, brushing a hand against a sleeve, laughing at jokes she despised. Then the invitation, would you like a walk? The answer was always yes. Why would it not be? They moved away from the lights, deeper between the trees where the night swallowed witnesses. Waiting there, hidden among branches, stood the other sister. One shot, quick, efficient. A grave had often been prepared in advance. By the time anyone wondered where the officer had gone, the killers were already cycling home. Other missions demanded speed instead of patience. Truce pedaled. Freddie sat on the back, gun concealed beneath her coat. They would pass a target on the street, close enough to smell tobacco or cologne. Freddie would turn, fire, and the bicycle would never slow. Two girls riding away. Nothing to see. Walking was too dangerous, Truce later explained. On a bike, you were already gone. Sometimes they chose the intimacy of a front door. They followed a man for days, memorized his routine, the sound of his steps, the hour he returned home. Then came the knock. He opened it to find a child. By the time recognition dawned, it was finished. Mission after mission, the sisters built a reputation, whispered through the occupation. The Germans tightened security. Collaborators grew nervous. But suspicion rarely landed on teenage girls, and that blind spot allowed the killings to continue. Yet even as they became more efficient, more deadly, something inside them resisted becoming numb. They cried afterward. They remembered faces. They carried every shot with them. Soon someone new would enter their circle, someone brilliant, determined, impossible to forget. A young woman whose appearance would make her famous, and eventually mark her for death. In 1943 the resistance cell gained a new member. Her name was Hannie Schaft. Where Freddie and Truce came from poverty and political struggle, Hannie had grown up in a more comfortable world. Her father was a teacher. She had attended university in Amsterdam and dreamed of becoming a lawyer, someone who defended rights, protected the vulnerable, believed in the power of justice written into law. Then the occupiers demanded loyalty. Students were ordered to sign a declaration of obedience to Nazi Germany. Most complied. Refusal meant expulsion, blacklisting, danger. Hannie refused. With a single signature withheld, her old life ended. She did not go home. She went underground. Hannie was impossible to overlook. Bright red hair, striking green eyes, pale skin, a face that lingered in memory. It made her charismatic. It also made her vulnerable. Franz van der Wiel welcomed her, but as with the sisters, trust had to be earned. He handed her a pistol and pointed to a supposed German officer. The order was simple: kill him. Hannie walked toward the target, pulse roaring in her ears. Her hand trembled as she raised the weapon and pulled the trigger. Click! Nothing! The gun was empty. The officer turned around, smiling. Another test. She had passed. From that moment, Hannie joined Freddie and Truce.
3 young women, each different, fitting together like parts of a machine. Hanny became the thinker, precise, methodical. She planned routes, studied patterns, anticipated consequences. Truce was the commander, decisive and fierce, able to make impossible choices in seconds.
Freddy was the scout, mapping streets, memorizing alleys, always knowing how to vanish. Together they were devastating. Their work expanded far beyond assassinations. They sabotaged railway lines to halt deportation trains. They carried messages and weapons. They smuggled Jewish children across borders under cover of darkness, whispering comfort to little ones who could not understand why they had to leave everything behind. They stole ration cards, forged identities, tracked troop movements and fed information to Allied intelligence, and still, when necessary, they killed, sometimes German officers, often Dutch collaborators, the neighbours who had chosen power or profit over conscience. Those targets could be the hardest. Familiar faces, same language, same streets, but betrayal cut deeper than nationality. We were removing a disease, Truce would say after the war. Like surgeons, there were no courts, no prisons. Under occupation, justice came from the barrel of a gun. As the months passed, Hanny's name began to circulate in German reports. Witnesses remembered her hair. Descriptions repeated themselves from town to town. Find the girl with the red hair. She tried to adapt, dyed it darker, wore glasses, changed coats, bicycles, habits, but a face like hers could not stay invisible forever, and while the net slowly tightened, the 3 women continued their operations, moving through the Netherlands like sparks in dry grass. Each success made them bolder, each mission made capture more likely. Soon the resistance leadership would present them with an order that chilled even these hardened fighters, an order that forced them to decide not how to kill, but where killing must stop. War erodes boundaries. Each mission makes the next one easier to justify. Each death rewrites what once seemed unthinkable. Step by step, people can travel very far from who they used to be. Freddy, Troze and Hanny understood that danger. So when the order arrived, it struck them like ice water. The target was not a soldier, not a collaborator carrying lists, not an informant. It was a family. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Reich Commissioner of the Netherlands, one of the most powerful Nazis in the country, remained beyond the resistance's reach. Guarded, protected, untouchable, but his children were not. The plan was simple in its cruelty. Kidnap them, use them as bargaining chips to free imprisoned resistance members, and if the demand failed, kill them. The message hung in the air. 3 young women who had shot men in forests, in streets, at their own front doors, now faced a different kind of assignment, one that did not involve danger to themselves, but to innocence. Freddy did not hesitate. "We are not Hitler," she said. "Resistance fighters do not murder children. They had crossed many lines already. They would cross more before the war ended. But this one defined who they were." And who they refused to become. They rejected the mission. It was the boundary between fighting evil and imitating it. Not long after, the brutality of occupation answered them in its own language. Truth was cycling through the city when she heard screaming. Real terror, the kind that makes the body turn before the mind can think. A Dutch SS man, one of their own countrymen, had seized a baby from a family. The father shouted. A young girl cried. The soldier lifted the infant high and smashed it against a wall. The child died instantly. Everything stopped. Truce has braked so hard her bicycle nearly tipped. She did not wait for orders, permission, strategy. There was no time for hierarchy or planning. There are moments when action is the only possible answer. She drew her pistol and fired. The collaborator fell dead in the street. People stared. No one moved. Years later, she would speak about it without apology. "That was not a mission," she said. But I do not regret it. Some things do not require orders. The war ground on. By now Hanny's face had become legend. Too many witnesses. Too many reports. Her red hair had been seen near too many bodies. The Germans circulated descriptions everywhere. Find her. Arrest her. End her. Hanny changed her appearance again, dyed the famous hair black, altered her clothes, tried to shrink herself into anonymity. But even as wanted posters multiplied, she continued to work. Stopping meant surrender, and surrender meant allowing the machine of deportations and executions to continue untouched. Yet fate was closing in. Soon betrayal born not from hatred but from pain and desperation would reveal what disguises could not hide, and the girl with the red hair would begin her final journey,
By 1944, Hannie Schaft was no longer just a resistance fighter. She was a symbol.
To the underground she represented defiance, courage, the proof that the occupier could be struck back. To the Germans she was something else entirely, a ghost they could not catch. But ghosts leave traces. Witnesses remembered flashes of red hair at the edge of gunfire, a young woman walking calmly away from impossible scenes. Patrols became sharper, informants listened harder. Her description passed from office to office. Find the girl with the red hair. Hannie tried to erase herself. Dye, glasses, different routes, different habits. Still she kept working. In June 1944, she and a fellow fighter, Jan Bonekamp, were assigned to eliminate a collaborator named Willem Ragut. They located him, closed in and opened fire. Ragut fell, but chaos is never tidy. Bonekamp was hit in the stomach, gravely wounded. Hannie had seconds to choose, stay and die with him, or escape and continue the fight. She fled. Bonekamp was captured alive. The Germans took him to a hospital where pain and blood loss did what interrogation sometimes could not. At first he resisted, he gave them nothing. So they tried deception. An officer posed as a member of the resistance, a friend, someone there to help. In his delirium, Bonekamp believed him. He gave up an address. Hannie's, shortly after, he died. The Germans moved quickly. They raided her parents' home, arrested her mother and father, and sent them to a concentration camp. Hannie vanished into hiding. For the first time since she had joined the struggle, she was forced into stillness. If she were caught now, others would fall with her. Networks would unravel, friends would die, so she waited. Weeks turned into months. But the war was shifting. Allied armies were advancing. Liberation felt close enough to taste. Remaining underground while history rushed forward became unbearable. On March 21st, 1945, Hannie made a decision. She would return to work. She mounted her bicycle, carrying illegal newspapers and a pistol, and rode through Haarlem toward her contacts. A checkpoint blocked the road. Routine, papers. A search. The soldiers found everything. She was arrested. In Amsterdam, they locked her in a prison cell and began interrogations that lasted for weeks. Isolation. Questions. Pressure. They knew they had someone important. They just needed confirmation. Then they noticed it. The dye was fading. At her roots, red was returning. They had their ghost. Hannie admitted what she had done. The assassinations, the sabotage, the attacks. She did not deny her war. But when they demanded names, her comrades, her friends, the people still fighting, she said nothing. Not Freddie, not Truus, not anyone. Whatever they did to her, she would not hand them another victim. She held that line all the way to the end. April 17th, 1945. Liberation was only weeks away. Everyone knew Germany was losing. There was even an informal understanding in place. Executions should stop. But some men preferred revenge to reason. Hannie was taken to the dunes at Overveen, a landscape already heavy with graves. Hundreds of resistance fighters lay buried beneath the sand. 2 Dutch collaborators were assigned the task. The first raised his pistol and fired. The bullet tore across her head, but failed to kill. Wounded, still standing, Hannie looked at him. "I shoot better than you," she said. The second man lifted a submachine gun. This time there was no mistake. Hannie Schaft was 24 years old. They pushed her into a shallow grave, so shallow that strands of red hair remained visible above the sand. 18 days later, the Netherlands would be free. The Netherlands celebrated liberation on May 5th, 1945. Flags returned to the streets, music poured from windows. Strangers embraced. After years of fear, the country exhaled. In the dunes of Overveen, they began to dig. 422 bodies were recovered. 421 men. And 1 woman, Hannie Schaft. She was carried from the sand as a martyr of the resistance. The nation wept. Queen Wilhelmina would later call her a symbol of defiance, the very face of Dutch courage. But history is not always generous to the living. Freddie and Truus survived the war, and survival came with its own burden. They returned their weapons. They tried to step back into ordinary life, into a country eager to rebuild, and in many ways eager to forget the moral chaos that occupation had forced upon it. Yet instead of parades, there was silence. Instead of gratitude, suspicion. Why? Because the sisters were associated with communism. And as Europe slid into the Cold War, yesterday's fighters became politically inconvenient. Recognition was postponed, minimized, quietly avoided. The girls who had risked everything were left to carry their memories alone. Truus found relief in art. She sculpted monuments, shaped grief into stone and bronze, wrote about the underground years, spoke publicly about choices that never truly stopped echoing. Freddie chose another path. She married Jan Dekker, built a family, raised children, tried to create a normal world from the ruins of the old one. But normality is fragile when ghosts sit beside your bed. She struggled with sleeplessness, with sudden memories, with anniversaries that returned every year, whether she welcomed them or not. On May 4th, the Dutch Day of Remembrance, dread would rise before morning. People often asked the question they should have known better than to ask. How many men had she killed? Freddie never answered. You should not ask a soldier that, she would say. Some weights are not meant to be shared. Decades passed. Governments changed. Politics softened. A new generation began to look back with clearer eyes. Finally, in 2014, an invitation arrived. Prime Minister Mark Rutte asked the sisters to attend a ceremony. There, after nearly 70 years, they were awarded the Mobilization War Cross for their service during World War II. Freddie was 89. Truus was 91. Freddie's son said it was the happiest day of her life. After all that time, someone had finally said the words that had been missing. Thank you. Streets in Haarlem took their names. Books were written. Documentaries produced. Honors at last found them. But the years of silence could never be erased. Truus died in 2016 at the age of 92. Freddie followed in 2018, just one day before her 93rd birthday. Throughout her life, Freddie visited Hanny's grave. She brought red roses to the friend whose war had ended in the sand. When asked what message she would leave to those who came after, she repeated the lesson their mother had given them at the very beginning. When you must decide, make sure it is the right decision, and always remain human. They had shot men in the dark. They had watched enemies fall. They had felt the recoil of history in their hands. But they never allowed themselves to forget that killing, even when necessary, carries a cost. The Nazis murdered millions with efficiency, with ideology, without remorse. Freddie, Truus and Hanny cried after they pulled the trigger. That is the difference. During the occupation, most people tried simply to survive. A small percentage collaborated, a small percentage resisted. Fewer still took up arms, and among them almost none were teenage girls. Freddie Oversteegen was one. No movie soundtrack followed her. No slow-motion heroics lit her path. Just a young woman on a bicycle deciding that some things are worth fighting for, and that even in war a person must fight to keep their soul. She never revealed the number of lives she ended, and she never apologized.